His name is Yoshioka Shidru, and both he and everyone else knew the poor guy was, by any measure, ugly. Still, Shidru had always worn his rough looks with a strange kind of pride of face, as he liked to joke, that looked like it had caught fire and been put out with a wooden plank. In sales, he leaned into his appearance, showing he wasn't scared of anyone, always carrying himself with a blunt, confident air around his coworkers. His motto was simple: make the customers smile, and his efforts never failed him. Sure, he was never exactly popular with women, but that never stopped him from being content with his life. At least, that was true until one day. One ordinary morning on the subway, Shidru was accused of touching a woman, even though both his hands were full of shopping bags. To make things worse, as he was being forced out of the train car, he dropped a pile of erotic games he'd just bought, doing nothing to improve his image in front of everyone watching the scene unfold. Of course, nobody believed him, and the world showed itself to be even crueler to the less fortunate in the looks department. After being judged for his supposed crime, Shidru was hit with a 300,000 yen fine. He took the blame, feeling like all he was buying was time in the courtroom. Either way, his life was now in shambles. He was fired from the job he'd done so well, and things only got worse from there. Years later, the woman who'd accused him was eventually exposed. It turned out she made a habit of pretending to be a victim in these situations, maybe because she simply didn't like ugly guys with sewer breath. Because she was underage, all she got was a restraining order. Shidru was furious, but there was nothing he could do. One day, as he wandered through a park with his head hung low, he saw a kid in a wheelchair getting bullied by some punks. Watching the scene, what once had been a point of pride, his ugly face now felt like a curse, a torment. The trauma from that false accusation haunted him, and he could no longer have a normal day. Before he realized it, he'd shrunk into a clumsy, awkward guy with a face no one liked and barely any social skills. Time passed 6 years. Just like that, Shidru Yoshioka became an unemployed recluse. He'd blown through all his savings and spent his days mooching off his parents, a failure even less useful than cattle. At that point, his days were filled with reading online articles about conspiracy theories, kidnappings, human experiments, and missing people, always wondering if it wouldn't be better if he just disappeared, too. Amid all that garbage, he came across an article about another life, in another world, a kind of second chance at existence. With a bitter smile, he dismissed it as nonsense, then laid his depressed head on his pillow, letting the idea spin around his mind at 2 in the morning. Sick of doing nothing with his life, Shidru decided to follow some instructions he found online, just to see what would happen. He turned his computer to face north, opened the window, raised both arms, and waited. It's not like he actually expected to go to another world. Maybe, deep down, he just wanted his life to be flipped upside down, anything to shake off all that existential misery. Suddenly, a message appeared on the screen. If you want to experience a new life, keep going. To return, you'll have to pay half your expected lifespan. Thinking it was just some weird virus, Shidru clicked continue, hoping to close the window and restart his PC. But instead, a new window popped up, showing what looked like RPG character stats. Tempted by the idea of starting over as a 16-year-old, Shidru kept going until he reached the appearance stat, which was set to 5 points. For some reason, maybe because he didn't believe any of this, Shidru cranked it all the way down to -255. This earned him a massive bonus, 13,000 points to spend on other attributes like strength, vitality, and defense. There was also a field to describe his character's special traits. Most people would have filled it with good stuff, but Shidru went the other way. He gave himself just 1 point in money acquisition, trading it in for even more bonus points. On top of that, he set it so he'd lose 10 GP anytime a girl touched him. And if he tried anything indecent, he'd die instantly and painfully. With that, Shidru Yoshioka now had 100,005,100 bonus points to allocate. But just as he was about to start distributing them, his computer signaled that time was up and he vanished without a trace. Next thing he knew, he woke up in an unfamiliar world, his appearance just as unpleasant as ever. Thinking it was all just a dream, he glanced in the mirror only to be genuinely shocked by the kind of power someone with -255 appearance could wield. Suddenly, 2 women and a man appeared, all dressed in nothing but their underwear, as if they'd been waiting for him to show up. One of the girls was shivering, so the big guy handed over an extra piece of clothing, but when she refused, he realized that even in this strange new world, ugly guys still didn't stand a chance with women. Eventually, the guy in the group introduced himself as Seiji, age 16. Shidru pegged him as the handsome, well-spoken type. The blonde girl simply said she was 16 too, but didn't give her name. Finally, the other girl introduced herself as Seika. Then, to everyone's surprise, Shidru revealed that he was also 16. To be honest, Seiji thought the big guy looked a lot older, so worn out by life, but admitted he had a certain presence. He added that they must all have ended up in this world after following some instructions they'd found online. The girls agreed, and they all realized that, somehow, they'd started a second life together in this bizarre new world. Ridiculously enough, while still in their underwear, Shidru, uninterested in the conversation, wandered off. He had no plans to make friends. He opened a drawer in a dresser and found a single coin. Remembering his money acquisition rate was just 1 in 10,000 and the game rounded down, so even a little luck meant nothing. Seiji asks the big guy if he's found anything, but he shakes his head. Nothing. Anyway, Shidru finally introduces himself properly and gets a friendly response, though his new buddy clearly isn't sure how to react to all this. Later on, the group of 4 gets their hands on some gear kits they have to split among themselves. When Shidru grabs a shirt, he grumbles that there's no way this thing will fit him, but to his surprise, it slides on perfectly. The girls light up when they put on their new outfits too, but Seiji can't help noticing something strange. There are 4 of each item and piece of gear, but together they've only got 7 coins. As if it was obvious, Seika points out that you can't divide 7 by 4, and the blonde wonders if someone might have pocketed a coin. Knowing full well it was him, Shidru says he doesn't need the money and tells the others to split it among themselves. Seika says that's fair, since all 7 coins were found by people other than Mr. Shidru. The big guy knows it's true he might have found a coin, but he let plenty slip by while the girl teases that he was probably more interested in checking out the girls than searching for cash. Anyway, in exchange for giving up the money, Shidru says he'd like the axe, but Seika shoots him down, telling him to keep his hands off other people's stuff. Seiji comments that if Shidru tries to go solo, he'll just end up failing again. The big guy doesn't quite get it, so Seiji admits he's really talking about himself because of his own communication problems and selfishness. He'd caused trouble for others, but now, with this shot at a second life, he wants to overcome all that and try again. For that reason, he can't just ignore Shidru, who also seems to have trouble connecting with people. Maybe they can tackle this together. So, the 4 of them settle it with rock, paper, scissors to divvy up the gear. And after losing every round, Shidru is left with a staff. Seiji offers him a handshake, but Shidru instantly refuses. He's decided he doesn't want to get hurt in his second life, so he's going it alone. After all, he picked being the ugliest guy in the world in exchange for totally broken stats, so the possibilities are endless. As for the rest of the gang, Seiji suggests heading to the city of Iria, which is the closest one on the map. He's still eager to invite the big guy along for the adventure, and, faced with no real choice, Shidru tags along. With everything settled, they open the house's front door, only to be met by a small creature. Seika practically jumps out of her skin, but Seiji steps up, delivers a brutal axe blow, and turns the goblin into a respawn. Playing the leader, Pretty Boy handles the mess and checks if his companion is alright, or so it seems. The chaos is far from over, as a whole swarm of goblins comes marching toward the Reborn quartet. Acting fast, Seiji tells Seika to string her bow so she can fight from a distance, while Shidru is supposed to help the archer. At the same time, the blonde should cover the left, while Seiji takes the right. With the plan in motion, Shidru wonders what Seiji meant about having communication issues. Up front, the 2 fighters are taking down the monsters in their path, while Seika fumbles trying to string her bow, distracted and passive. Shidru just stands there doing nothing until a monster clobbers him from behind. Furious now, he fights back, determined to show off his strength. But his counterattack is actually weaker than the hit he took. That's when the big guy realizes that, in this world, size isn't everything. He retreats under the assault from the little monster, only to take a blow to the knee that knocks him off balance. At that moment, it finally hits him. He forgot to assign his attribute points. Even so, he manages to block an attack and smack the goblin, which instantly shoots him up to level 31 thanks to his unique stats. Seiji and the blonde also level up, assigning their new points to strength and vitality. Watching all this, Shidru notices he can't see their status screens to copy what they're doing, so he just dumps 1 trillion points into every stat. The system totally glitches out, then comes back to reveal that he's now reached absolute god status. From that point on, whenever a goblin hit the big guy, he barely felt a tickle. In response, he flicks the little creature away with a single finger and takes a moment to savor his newfound power. Meanwhile, Seika is still struggling to string the damn bow. Up front, Seiji counts 16 goblins defeated, while the blonde tallies 13, leaving Seika feeling useless and even more embarrassed, facing the kind of situation he'd always tried to avoid. Shidru finally works up the courage to face his negative status and crawls over to help her out. She asks what the hell he's doing, and he explains he's got bowstring syndrome. Then, out of nowhere, the bow itself speaks in his mind. Shidru, put the string on the bow. The girl, a bit freaked out by this, backs off for a second, but then just hands him the weapon. Right away, Shidru remembers all those videos he used to watch when he was an unemployed loser and strings the bow like it's nothing. Impressed, Seika hands him an arrow and tells him to shoot, and Shidru does his best to avoid touching her. No point in losing 10% of his HP for no reason. Since he's now way over leveled, he decides to try out one of his archery skills and fires the arrow at the enemies, but the shot goes off into the woods. No one was ready for what happened next. Out of nowhere, a massive magic circle forms in the clouds, and suddenly, a dragon emerges, annihilating the goblins. To explain away this ridiculous feat, Shidru lies to Seika, saying he used to be in the archery club, and hands her the bow back. With more goblins closing in, the archer now had the chance to cover her teammates on the front lines from a distance. She let loose, firing away at the enemies like she had a machine gun in her hands. Somehow, though, she managed to miss every single shot. Watching the scene unfold, Shidru picked a different skill and turned a stick into more arrows, giving Seika another opportunity to waste every last one just as enthusiastically as before. Luckily, their two friends up front handled things just fine, clearing a path straight to Irie City. After the journey, everyone arrived at their new destination starving, and the first thing the blonde girl spotted was a local burger joint. Drawn in by the smell of fries, the group dashed inside, everyone except Shidru. Even though he enjoyed their company, it was time for him to say goodbye. Strolling through the city, Shidru caught his reflection in a fountain and wondered what he could find to satisfy his hunger. Just then, a cat approached. He reached out to pet it but hesitated, remembering that if it turned out to be female, he'd instantly lose 10% of his HP just like every other time he touched a girl. That rule still applied. Seika showed up right after, startling the big guy so badly he fell into the fountain and ended up soaked. Despite her chaotic entrance, her intentions were pure. She'd brought Shidru a huge burger to thank him for fixing the string on her bow. Distracted by the smell of teriyaki sauce, he reached out for the sandwich and accidentally brushed her finger, triggering the penalty he'd been so worried about. The result? 58 trillion points of damage, enough to wipe out the population of 300 Earths. The colossal damage sent his meal flying against the wall, leaving Seika devastated as her thoughtful gift became modern art. Embarrassed, Shidru tried to make things right, relying on those sales skills from his previous life. He apologized, explaining that his hand had been shaking because Seika was just too pretty. When he went to pick up the burger from the ground, Seika offered him the one she'd brought in her bag. Apologizing herself for being too pretty, Shidru noticed it was her own food, but she reminded him she was rich, unlike him, who didn't even have a penny to his name. Besides, he'd helped her not just with the bowstring, but also by making more arrows for her. Touched by her kindness, Shidru accepted the sandwich with a smile, thinking he might be able to return the favor one day. Just then, the rest of their friends arrived and called them back to continue the journey. So Shidru realized his solo adventure would have to wait. On the way, they stopped to buy supplies. Seika, never missing a chance to show off her wealth, ordered a ridiculous amount of arrows even though her bag was already overflowing. And Shidru could magically craft arrows by the dozen if he wanted to. After they finished shopping, the girl turned to the big guy and asked if he wasn't going to buy anything. But then she remembered of course he couldn't, since he was flat broke. The other two in the group arrived soon after, having found a nice inn where they could spend the night. Seika was practically bouncing with excitement to get there, but Shidru just wanted to hang out in the park and turned down the invitation. So, the girl offered to pay for his room. He refused, insisting he couldn't accept, but Seika wouldn't let it go. She teased him, saying he was only refusing because the offer came from her. Flustered, he denied it, but Seika just took that as a yes, grabbed him by the shirt, and dragged him along. Realizing he barely felt her grip through his clothes, Shidru started thinking maybe he could use that to his advantage, even if, right now, he was kind of mesmerized by how forceful she could be. Later at the inn, while Seiji was busy counting up how much money the group had left, Seika and the little blonde were taking a bath. Shidru, lying on his bed, thought about how he couldn't afford to rack up any more debt. Sadly, he didn't have any money in this world. His earnings were slashed to 1/10 of what they should be. If he didn't figure out a decent way to make some cash soon, he'd end up stuck somewhere, which would be a disaster. Maybe even bad enough to make him want to go back to the world he'd tried so hard to escape. Long story short, he needed to act, and fast. The next day, Shidrew handed out all sorts of food to his teammates. Everyone was thrilled, so he joked that he'd gotten it from some kind soul after pretending to be a tired worker catching the last train home. Seika didn't get the joke, which made Shidrew realize just how innocent she really was. To top it off, she scolded him for begging, saying that even though he was poor, that wasn't the answer. If he ever needed anything, he should just ask her. After all, everyone knew she was loaded. In reality, Shidrew had technically bought all the food. He'd figured out that the rules of the game here were a lot simpler than he thought. What he'd been doing was bartering. Using his sales skills, he cranked out a pile of arrows and sold them to the weapons shop, taking 40% of the price in goods. Once everyone was full, Seika pulled out the map to pick their next adventure. She admitted she'd love to explore more of the city first, but the leader reminded them that their income came first. Monsters didn't exactly pay out cash. His plan was to take the group to Arga Cave, not far from Irie, the town they were in. Seika was all for it, excited for another quest, but the blonde girl looked a little uneasy about the danger. Hearing they were headed for Arga Cave, a man walked up and offered to be their guide. He introduced himself as another reincarnated, just like the rest of them. The guy did a double take when he saw Shidrew, who just shrugged. Yeah, that's really his face. Anyway, the man pulled out 4 items he claimed could be found in the very first house you land in when you enter this world, and that they gave a one-time discount at the inn. Seika was amazed and wished she'd found any of those in her own starter house, and the guide said they could use the discount at reception. Seiji was immediately suspicious about this sudden generosity, but Seika didn't care and just took the item, grinning. The leader asked who the guy was, and he introduced himself as Kayoshiro, a humble worker who made a living showing newbies around. Shidrew was instantly on edge. The guy looked exactly like the type who preyed on beginners. Still, with the power of the absolute god on his side, he decided to let Seiji handle it. Even with the group running low on funds, Seiji figured hiring a guide was a solid investment for this quest. He offered Kayoshiro 120 rira a day, plus a bonus from whatever they found in the cave. With everything settled, the team set off for Arga Cave. On the way, they ran into a horde of goblins, giving Seika yet another opportunity to showcase her incredible talent for missing every single shot. Feeling sorry for her, Kayoshiro suggested she learn to save her arrows. Seika just laughed, being rich. She had no idea what that meant, so Kayoshiro tried a new approach. Putting it in terms she'd understand. Seika, imagine each arrow costs 100 million yen. That finally clicked for her. With that thought, she began to take aim more carefully and, at last, managed to hit a goblin. It was her first time. Riding high, she boasted that it was a piece of cake and declared that now, with her archery club experience, she'd even surpassed Mr. Shidrew. The rest of the group moved on to deal with the remaining goblins, leaving Shidrew behind, still wary of the guide. Even if the guy had just helped Seika out, his instincts as a salesman always made him suspicious of any business deal. As he pondered, he realized it was Kayoshiro who'd recommended those helmet lanterns they were all wearing, and they were clearly made by another reincarnator. Since nothing like them existed in this world, they could have bought torches, but of course, Seika insisted on spending 60 rira each on the helmets. Later on, during a break, Seiji and the blonde girl sparred to train. The guide advised Seiji to guard his wrists and use the weight of his weapon when striking. As for the girl, she needed to remember that her dagger's strength lay in its speed and lightness. Off on her own, Seika kept missing every single shot. Kayoshiro asked if Shidrew was going to join in, but the big guy said he didn't have the right skills for it. The guide admitted that leveling up with a staff was tough, but the weapon's final ability was amazing if you had the patience to stick with it. Shidrew already knew that. Before dawn, he'd left town to make some arrows and ended up running into a giant orc. That's when he decided to try out his staff's strongest move. The name of the power was Final Destiny +2, a skill so destructive it promised to wipe out everything within a 200-mile radius, potentially killing about 1.5 million people. If Shidrew ever used that thing in Saitama Prefecture, he'd basically connect the Pacific Ocean to the Sea of Japan, so of course, he cancelled it on the spot. Anyway, Kayoshiro advises the young man to get into some fights and gain real experience, or else he'll have to retire, just like Kayoshiro did. back in the day. Kaisho used to be part of a mercenary group where he and the leader were pretty much equals, but he ended up retiring because he just didn't have the right skills. The boss, on the other hand, climbed all the way to the top and eventually became king. Kaioshiro is convinced that Shidru would be shocked to find out that Guy was level 80, with an average of 160 points in every stat. In reality, Shidru thinks the guy's pretty weak, but his stunned expression makes the guide believe he's impressed. Eventually, the team makes it to the Arga cave, which looked just like some ancient ruin. Seika was trembling with fear at the idea of going in, so the blonde offered her hand to calm her down, which made Shidru wonder just how old this girl was. She acted like a kid, lighting up when she saw the limestone stalactites hanging from the ceiling. Kaioshiro, meanwhile, warned her to be careful that none of them came crashing down on her head, sensing his companion's immaturity. Seiji pulled a little trick to figure out Seika's age. He claimed it'd be good to know for the team's strategy, then asked her how old she really was back in the real world, revealing that he himself was in his 30s. At that, Seika admitted she wasn't actually 16 like her body in this world, she was older, 17. Shidru could hardly believe it, but Seiji pretended not to mind and asked if she was studying for college entrance exams. Seika said yes, and she'd only ever gotten straight A's. Led by Kaioshiro, the group moved on, battling giant bats as they made their way to the deepest part of the cave, where a massive door awaited them. As always, Seika dashed ahead, trying to open it without a second thought. So the guide asked her what level she was. When she answered 3, he told her she'd be killed the second she stepped inside that room. There wasn't some amusement park behind that door, but the boss of this whole mess. Horrified, Seika ducked behind her friend, and Seiji decided it was best to call it a day. Before heading back, the leader thanked the guide for his help, but Kaioshiro had other plans to wrap up their outing. To celebrate their contract, he said he'd prepared a little party for his comrades. So, he led the group to a door with a sign that read, "Meeting Room," 3 words that nearly drove Shidru mad, thanks to all his corporate life in the past. Seiji asked if the guide built this room, but Kaioshiro said no. It was actually another reincarnated person who created this safe place, where neither monsters nor magic could break in. Once inside, Seika was blown away by the table packed with treats, and Kaioshiro encouraged everyone to enjoy this welcome party for the newly reincarnated. Shidru quietly used his detection skill to check for any drugs hidden in the cans, but figured that, even if there was, nothing like that would actually work on him. Seiji thanked Kaioshiro for the party, but said he needed to get back to town before sunset. Kaioshiro didn't push it. He just said he understood he only wanted to do something nice for everyone. Feeling guilty for brushing off the guy's kindness so quickly, Seiji changed his mind and promised to make the most of the moment. And so, the 4 of them sat down for drinks, while the leader couldn't stop crying over the fact that he'd suspected someone as nice as Kaioshiro. Seika chugged her whole can and immediately asked for another, making Shidru worry about his companions. He could use an antidote spell, but since that would glow, everyone would catch on right away. Wondering if conversation might counteract the effects, he asked the group what they used to do in their past lives. But that question obviously soured the mood, since everyone here had come to this world as a loser. Even so, Seiji broke the ice, puffed out his chest, and started sharing his story. When he was still in school, he got tired of everything and ran away from home to start his own company, Success Life. Shidru remembered having done business there, and the boss looked just like Seiji. Seiji recalled that one day, a salesman showed up at his company out of the blue, trying to sell him a ridiculously expensive copier. Naturally, he tried to bring the price down, but the salesman told him something he'd never forget. "I'm going to make you smile. I'll never let you down." He also advised the boss to work less and enjoy life more. That's what Seiji carried with him ever since, stressing less and doing more of what he loved. Still, he ended up going bankrupt after a failed investment in artificial intelligence. Because of that, he feels like he let that salesman down, betrayed his expectations. So, Seiji swore that in this world, he'd never make the same mistake again. Remembering all that, he mentioned that the salesman's name was Shidru and asked the big guy for his last name. Shidru's real family name was Yoshioka, but he lied and said it was Sasaki. Suddenly, the sleeping drug kicked in, and all 4 of them passed out. Kaioshiro returned to chain them up with his goons, only for us to find out that Shidru had just been pretending to be unconscious, and the feeling of being handcuffed brought back memories he'd rather forget. Either way, it wasn't him who made the first move. It was Seiji, who managed to stay half aware even after the drug. Obviously, the kid took a beating, given his condition, while his companion was just biding his time. waiting for the right moment to act. When Seiji realized Kyoshiro was a rookie kidnapper, he lamented that so many people who arrived in this world were already broken-hearted from their old lives, and just as they were about to get a second chance, men like Kyoshiro came along and snatched it away. Kyoshiro just agreed this was a world for losers, and it was easy to fool people desperate for a shot at redemption. Tired of all the chatter, the boss finally orders his goons to finish the job. That's when Shidru jumps into action. Pulling out his improvised skill, Pig's Leap. Using his weight, he launches himself forward and knocks the thugs back. Meanwhile, Seiji, who thinks Shidru is incredibly weak, suddenly finds himself at a massive disadvantage. So he vows to end his enemies in a single blow. The thugs ignore him and keep chasing their targets, forcing Shidru to step in again, this time with spinning attacks that make full use of his size and shape. According to the big guy, if these punks want to hurt him, they'll need to send in a woman. But the fight gets so close that it looks like Shidru's about to get beaten down. That's when Seiji reveals a brilliant light shining from his right fist. He says he once swore never to betray his friend's trust, and that he'd pay the price if he ever broke that promise. In exchange, Seiji was granted this extraordinary power, which bursts into a red glow whenever his anger hits its limit. Right then, Kyoshiro tries to strike Seiji with his sword, but Shidru blocks the attack with his handcuffs and tells his friend to use him as a shield while he gets his skill ready. In real life, Shidru always hated how good people were the ones who got the short end of the stick. So now, his biggest wish is to build a new world where kindness actually gets rewarded. With that resolve, Shidru Yoshoka decides he's not going to run away, and asks the boss to show him how it's done. With that, Seiji gains the confidence he needs and unleashes the red light from his fist. The surge of power transforms his muscles dramatically, even giving him wings, turning the boy into Aldean, the unbreakable hero, a nickname Shidru isn't fond of at all. Shidru tries to make sense of what's happening, while Aldean conjures the holy thunder at lightning speed, a move known as Aurora Shining Destination. But just as the hero's punch is about to connect with the main villain's face, he pulls back. After all, it's not up to him to pass judgment on these criminals. That's a job for the law. Sure, punishing these guys himself would be simple, but that would rob them of the chance to truly pay for what they've done. If the law handles them, maybe just maybe they'll have to face their sins and be reborn. Shidru thinks his partner is being way too soft, but Kyoshiro surrenders and drops his weapon. With that, Aldean turns his back on the man and warns that there'll be no mercy if they commit another crime. Shidru knows it's a terrible idea to take his eyes off the crook. And sure enough, Kyoshiro uses the distraction to attack the hero. That's when the big guy jumps in, throwing his full weight around to block the enemy and send him crashing to the ground. The other thugs immediately start kicking the poor guy while he's down, but it looks like that massive frame is enough to soak up every blow. In response, Shidru digs a booger from his nose and flings it at the ceiling like a missile, causing an explosive mess. He credits the attack to Aldean, saying it was all his doing and that he can do even more if he wants. No one really buys the ugly guy's story, but he swears he saw a white eagle descend from the sky as if answering the hero's fury to save those in need. Aldean asks if that actually happened, and Shidru, with a straight face, says it did. Either way, after that display of strength, the gang finally surrenders for good. Kyoshiro, speaking for the whole crew, begs for forgiveness for their crimes and promises never to do wrong again. Obviously, Shidru thinks this sudden change of heart is way too convenient, so he orders all the criminals to line up. Then, he tells Aldean to hit them with his special move. The thugs start sweating bullets at the thought, but the winged hero, of course, isn't on board with that. So, the big guy asks if at least they could be punished with a slap from flaming fists, because they clearly don't understand other people's pain and need to learn through the whip of love. Understanding his friend's point, Aldean vows that his fist will pierce the pit of evil. That said, he simply returns to his original form, explaining that there's no reason to be angry anymore, and the whip of love shouldn't come from rage otherwise, it's just self-indulgence. In this Good Samaritan's view, love means carving the pain of your hand and the one you'd strike into your heart. Like everyone else, Shidru has no idea what any of that's supposed to mean, but whatever. Seiji then orders everyone to stand tall, make of that what you will, because now it's time to teach each of them a lesson. As they follow his command, the hero smacks each thug across the face with all his might, while they thank him for the punishment. Watching the absurd scene unfold, Shidru can't help but wonder how on earth he ended up here. After the punishment, the adventurer duo ties up the criminals and helps their friends. But then, Seijo passes out. Kaiosho celebrates that the sedative finally kicked in. Convinced this is his chance to win. To seal his victory, he invites Shidru, whom he calls Pig, to join their gang, pointing out how tough it must be for him hanging around a group of pretty boys where he never stands a chance. On the other hand, if he teams up with these middle-aged losers, maybe the big guy will land a woman every now and then, not to mention some good cash. In response, Shidru breaks his chains and insists Seiji is stronger than he is. The thugs can't understand how someone so ridiculously ugly could be so righteous. And even though Shidru usually doesn't care about this kind of insult, he's starting to lose his patience. Hours later, he turns the gang in to the authorities and gets a reward of 100,000 riras, the equivalent of 10 million yen in Japan or 350,000 ris. With everyone back on their feet, Seiji suggests they all enjoy the money, but Seika reminds him that she and her friend were asleep the whole time and didn't help at all. Still, their leader takes responsibility for putting them in danger by being careless and trusting Kaiosho. Even so, the girls point out that it was the boy who single-handedly took out all the henchmen. Seika asks if Shidru was asleep too, and he's left speechless. Then, Seiji assures everyone that the big guy was the bravest of them all, using his enormous, round body to protect him. Hearing this, Seika celebrates and declares the big guy the MVP, the best player of the match. Seiji couldn't agree more, so he tells his friend to take the money. But as it turns out, Shidru's reward gets slashed by a factor of 10,000, so he'll barely see a penny of it. Because of that, he's already thinking about saying goodbye to the group once he pays off his debt to Seika. He explains to the crew that he spends money way too fast and needs someone wise to hold onto it for him. Seika volunteers to be his savings account after all. As she always says, she's rich and probably thinks that means she's a financial genius. Seiji jokes that she blows all her money on useless stuff, dragging her through the mud metaphorically. Even though her confidence has taken a hit, Shidru still thinks leaving his share with her is a good call, and so that's exactly what he does. He uses Seika as his personal bank. Without wasting time, he and his bank hit up a burger joint for a good meal, and the girl seems delighted to show off her money-handling skills. "I'll pay," she says at the counter, as if she weren't using his cash. Alone for a moment, Shidru figures that 25,000 riras should be enough for a night at an inn and a few meals. After that, he'll just have to get by on his wits, penniless as ever. Speaking of which, the time to say goodbye to the group is almost here, which means this meal feels like a last supper. Sometime later, Seika shows up with a burger big enough to satisfy anyone's hunger. She asks for the magic word, so he just goes, "Thanks." That doesn't do it for her, so Shidru tries again with a proper "thank you," finally making her smile. Right then, Shidru realizes she actually loves these goofy little interactions, which tells him she's nothing like the grumpy girl he first thought she was. To keep the conversation going, he asks if she likes burgers. She answers, "I fell in love with them the day before yesterday." That throws him for a loop. He wonders how much of a shut-in she must be to only try a burger now, already well past her rookie days. But it kind of makes sense. She bites into the front of the sandwich and lets most of the filling spill out the back. Seika asks what his stats are, but he tries to dodge the question, saying they're nothing special. She's disappointed, because apparently, he missed out on a trick the game gives you before tossing you into this world. According to her, if you lower your appearance stat, you get more bonus points. Shidru is stunned that Saka knows about this, but he points out she doesn't look like she used that trick. Actually, Seika reveals she dropped her appearance all the way down to -16. He doesn't get it, she's definitely not ugly. Flustered by his reaction, she asks if he thinks she's pretty. He, a little embarrassed, says yes. Seika admits she made a wish on the game's start screen. Down at the bottom, there was a special details section, and she wrote in that she wanted to be pretty. Shidru's jaw just about drops. He could have done that too. And now he's stuck looking like that model from a commercial he can't even remember the name of. Right then, a little cat wanders into the diner and catches their attention. Noticing how excited she is since she's never seen one up close, Shidru tells her to go ahead and pet it. Out of nowhere, Seika remembers she can stand now, so she rushes after the cat, only to trip along the way. She doesn't fall, but it's enough to scare the cat right out the door. Shidru, thinking she was about to faceplant, throws himself after her like an idiot completely unnecessarily. Seika, totally unfazed, asks why he's on the floor. He says he just likes to get a bit of exercise after eating. In the end, she does try to pet the kitty, but it's way more skittish than she expected and barely lets her touch it. Meanwhile, Shidru mortified rushes off to the bathroom for a little reflection on the toilet. We've all done it at least once. Sitting there, nearly in tears, he remembers how earlier Seika showed him her hands, and then looked at and touched them herself. Usually, when someone wants to feel pretty, they touch their face, not their hands, but maybe it's not just her hands, maybe Seika has some kind of disability affecting her legs, which is why she can't walk on her own. Poor girl, Shidru thinks. God doesn't exist. Or wait, he does. He's God, the absolute God, Shidru himself. At that moment, Seika knocks on the men's room door, asking if whatever he ate isn't sitting well. He says he'll be out in a second, and thinks to himself that this girl has zero sense of social cues. With all that innocence, she'd be an easy target for creeps like Kayoshiro. Still, there's something only the absolute God can do in a situation like this. After washing his hands and face, Shidru comes out. When Seika calls him to go meet up with the rest of the team, he decides then and there he's going to make sure Seika becomes the best person she can possibly be. Later that day, in a tavern, Seiji brings up the future. He wants to know what everyone thinks about picking a class now, since planning out your stats based on your class will help in combat, making everyone's abilities more dynamic. Seiji himself wants to be a hero. He suggests the blonde girl should be a mage, and she's all for it, while Shidru is recommended for epic fighter. The big guy isn't thrilled with how that sounds, and Seika chimes in that she wants to be a hero too. Like the group's leader, everyone figured she'd want to be an epic fighter. But as always, she's full of surprises and suddenly changes her mind. Anyway, after all that discussion, everyone picks their class, and here's how the party shapes up. The blonde is the hunter, Seiji is the hero, Seika chose mage, and Shidru, of course, is the epic fighter. When Shidru sees the fancy gear their leader's rocking, he thinks Seiji may be careful about most things, but he sure splurged on this one. Seika tugs at Shidru's sleeve like a little kid, announcing that she's now a great mage. After all her talk about wanting to be a fighter, Shidru has to admit, this class actually suits her perfectly. Anyway, Seiji unfurls the map and says the group's next stop is the biggest city in the region, the Principality of Valeria. But before that, he warns everyone that they can only bring snacks worth up to 3 riras each. With that out of the way, the adventure starts tomorrow morning. After they're dismissed, Seika musters up all her courage and asks her friend to jump rope at the park. That little request jogs a memory for Shidru. A while back, he and Sokka were in a weapon shop. She complained there were hardly any weapons for mages. She even got interested in a weapon for epic fighters, but dropped it when she found out which class it belonged to. Then she liked the look of a nunchaku for epic kung fu fighters. Shidru and the shopkeeper figured she meant the nunchaku, but she was eyeing the rope next to it. According to the clerk, that rope is the most basic yet supreme weapon of kung fu fighters, which makes him think maybe she's some kind of seasoned warrior. After leaving the shop with her new gear, Shidru teaches her how to use it. Seika's honestly surprised that even slowpokes like him can jump rope. Just a few hours later, she's starting to get the hang of it, but she's a little sad. She wishes she could be jumping rope with her blonde friend, who, by the way, has never told anyone her name, not even once, which makes Seika wonder if the girl just doesn't want to get close to people. About that, Shidru comes up with a good idea for how she could get to know the other girl better. Back in the present, the giant hides in a bush while Seika teaches the blonde how to jump rope. At some point, though, Seika brings up the subject of the girl's name, and just like that, the blonde stops jumping, as if it's a touchy subject. So, Seika shares that she and Shidru had come up with a nickname for her. Thinking of words that felt soft, like breeze, she landed on Reese. Overwhelmed, the blonde leaps high across the square, showing off some serious athletic skills, and Shidru remembers that, come to think of it, this girl didn't even get hurt in their first fight. Seeing what she can do, all the adventurers in the square crowd around her, offering her well-paid positions in their parties. Seika suddenly feels left out and rejected, to the point that she starts crying. Shidru steps out of hiding to comfort his friend. The odd adventurers begin judging the girl and getting annoyed at her, but the blonde stands up for her teammate, saying she only jumped like that to make Seika happy. Shidru jokes that it would have been a good idea to say that, instead of pretending to be a kangaroo, and the blonde runs off, embarrassed, after apologizing for the commotion. That night, at the inn, Seika uses Shidru's cape as a handkerchief to blow her nose. Out of nowhere, she finds a letter slipped under her door. It's a note from Reese, apologizing again and saying how much she loved the nickname, asking Seika if they can be friends. Excited, Seika dashes out to find her new friend. Once he's alone, Shidru calls out to Reese, who's been hiding in another hallway. She invites the young giant to talk in one of the rooms. Kneeling in midair, she shows off more of her athletic prowess as she apologizes to him. But before she gets to the reason for her apology, she reveals she knows Shigeru's last name isn't Sasaki, it's Yoshioka. In other words, he's Mr. Y, the one who saved the saint in that story the leader told back in the dungeon. Shigeru asks why she thinks his name is Yoshioka. That's when she explains she has a special details ability that lets her read other people's status windows. Instantly, the boy panics what if she saw his insane stats. But Reese brushes that off, switching topics to ask if he noticed what happened to Sage's body in the previous world. Shigeru admits he's not entirely sure, so Reese confesses she was the one who messed up the girl, and that's exactly why she's here to make amends. Back in the previous world, Reese was involved in a certain program, and that's where she met Seika. She genuinely wanted people to be happy, including Seika, but when things got out of hand, there was an accident that Reese couldn't stop. Because of a lack of communication and misunderstandings, her friend ended up getting hurt, and it was all on her. That's why Reese wished, through her special details, to understand others better. That's also how she got the ability to read people's windows. The program she was involved in was actually an artificial intelligence project led by Seiji. In fact, Seiji is Reese's older brother. Shigeru is stunned after all. Seiji doesn't even seem to know who the girl is. She explains she's completely different in this world, so she figured her brother wouldn't recognize her. Reese had heard from her brother about Mr. Yoshioka, and she thought he might be the Mr. Y from Shigeru's story. All this time, Reese was searching for someone like Shigeru Yoshioka, someone who could make people smile. Maybe it was fate that she ended up meeting the merchant in this world. Shigeru asks if she's messing with him, but she assures him she can't lie. That, too, is part of her regret the price she pays for her special details. With that out of the way, Reese points out that as the absolute god, Shigeru now has to make Seika smile and help Seiji as well. So she asks him to help guide them. Shigeru thinks guide sounds like overkill, but he agrees they both deserve something for who they are. After all, they're way too pure and innocent for this world, and it's only a matter of time before they run into someone with bad intentions. As stressful as it is taking care of those two airheads, which is apparently causing Shigeru's receding hairline, he's fine with teaming up with Reese to keep helping their friends. Pleased with his attitude, Reese decides, right then and there, to cut her own hair with a knife live. For her, that's how she deals with her issues. Plus, Seika once told her she'd look cute with short hair, so this is a way to feel closer to her new friend. Shigeru admires the girl's determination and strikes a deal with her. They'll make Seika and Seiji smile together. Right then, those two spot a creature that had been following Shigeru at the city gates. Seika says she's never seen anything like it before, and Shigeru explains it's a pack animal that only exists in this world. Reese shows up with her new haircut and apologizes for keeping everyone waiting. She asks her friend if the cut suits her, and Saka happily says it looks wonderful. With everyone ready, the group's leader announces it's time to set off for the Principality of Valeria. On the way, the party runs into threats in the surrounding area monsters that Seika defeats with spells like Petite Cold, a freezing spell that delights the mage when it works. Suddenly, a bird swoops down at Seika, but Seiji jumps in front and takes it out with a quick slash of his sword. Up in a tree, Reese provides expert cover with her bow and arrow, keeping everyone safe. After overcoming the obstacles ahead, Seika tells Shigeru her skills as a mage have finally blossomed. He agrees, albeit awkwardly. As she basks in her own charm, Seiji notices the sun is setting and suggests they camp there for the night. Before they cross the mountains to reach the Principality of Valeria, the party shelters under the roots of a hollow tree, which serves as their base. Taking the shortcut from Iria saves them 2 days compared to the main road, but it's rough terrain and there are no inns along the way. Even so, Seika's determination led them to take this path. Ecstatic as she sweeps the camp, it's her first time doing anything like this, and she can't hide her excitement. Ever the jokester, Seiji asks if she'd rather build the campfire or go fishing. She picks fishing, making Shigeru wonder if he accidentally signed up for summer camp. Seika grabs the fishing rod, but gets the hook stuck in her cloak, so the big guy steps in to help the clumsy mage. In the end, he decides to join in, but even then, neither of them manages to catch a single fish despite seeing them swimming in the clear river. Seika, however, is bothered by something else. She confides in her friend that she doesn't want to be a crybaby anymore. It makes her feel pathetic, especially since sometimes she doesn't even know why she's crying. She's not even sad. Shigeru tells her crying is actually a good thing. People don't always cry because they're sad. but because something touched their hearts. On the other hand, some people eventually forget how to cry, and when that happens, you stop getting stronger. If you don't know why you're crying, maybe you should ask yourself what really touched your heart. Seika bursts into tears at that advice and wipes her nose on Shidru's cloak just as Riz shows up to check on the fishing duo. She comments that Shidru stinks, then tells them the campfire is ready, so she came to get everyone. Seika reports they didn't catch a single fish, which gives Riz an idea. She whips out her bow and in 4 quick shots lands 4 fish, securing dinner for the group. Seika picks up the catch with a big smile and carries it back to camp. Alone with Shidru, the archer points out that Seika is always smiling when she's around him, and it makes her think her brother might be right. Shidru really is the kind of guy who knows how to make people happy. The big guy thinks she's been praising him a bit too much lately, but she disagrees because, next to this guy, she honestly feels like they can get everything right. And that's no exaggeration. Still a little uncomfortable with all the attention, Shidru stands up to head back to camp. That's when Riz asks him not to tell the rest of the team about her, because if they find out, the 4 of them will end up splitting up. When the 2 of them return to the fire, the boy's eyes are glued to the oatmeal with veggies and barley that Seika made, and suddenly he's hit by a wave of nostalgia, as if he's back in his previous world. After Seiji explains the recipe, Shidru finds himself thinking that this guy is a natural leader, just by the way he connects with everyone. Soon, everyone grabs a portion of porridge. When Seika sees Riz blowing on her food to cool it down, she copies her friend and makes her smile. Shidru then asks Seiji what the plan is for their journey now, like, are they supposed to take down the Demon King or something? Head down, the leader admits he's not even sure there are any objectives in this world. But for now, their best bet is to head for the Principality of Valeria, a busier region where they can gather information and maybe figure out what to do next. Listening in, Shidru notes to himself that this guy really does sound like a company boss. Right then, a woman suddenly stumbles out of the forest, injured, and collapses in front of the camp. A few hours earlier, back in the morning, she'd been running from some armed men through the woods, even missing an arm. She managed to give them the slip after a huge effort. Filled with regret, she sat down to rest, upset over having written something important in the special details section of her game window. Thinking about it, her mind drifted to an event from her past life when her boyfriend had heartlessly dumped her for a prettier woman. From that day on, it felt like her whole life revolved around a beauty she didn't have, as if being pretty was the answer to everything, the only way to ever be happy or successful. The thought became such an obsession that she lost her mind completely, even swearing to get revenge by taking out every beautiful woman she met. Suddenly, she wakes up at Seiji's camp, where he's tending to her wounds. Seika arrives soon after, having used healing magic on her, but the woman still feels intense pain in her severed arm. Still, the group keeps looking after her, and she manages a quiet "thank you." Seika corrects her, saying it should be "thank you very much," but the woman just ignores her and asks to move closer to the fire. Shidru thinks it's pretty childish for the stranger to ignore Seika like that. But, honestly, the girl is kind of pushing it too. According to the ex-salesman, you can't win someone over the first time you meet them, and this woman is a perfect example. When she first collapsed at the camp entrance, Seiji had asked Shidru to get water, so he rushed off to help. Riz stopped him on the way to hand him a bucket and quietly mentioned that she'd read the woman's special details. It said she'd never forgive pretty women. In fact, she swore to cut open every single one she met and watch them die. In other words, Seika is definitely on her hit list. Back in the present, Seiji asks the wounded woman her name, and she says it's Riaya. He offers her some food, which she accepts. But as soon as Seika approaches with a bowl of porridge, Riaya practically freaks out and tries to grab the weapon from her belt, except Riz had already disarmed her. Even with her unarmed, Shidru and Riz watch her every move, ready to kick her out at the first sign of trouble. Seiji asks how she got hurt so badly. Riaya says her group was attacked and split up, so she ran to survive. Hearing that, Shidru's not buying it. Seiji tells her their team is heading to Valeria and that they'll protect her there. Riaya asks if she can trust him, and when Seika chimes in with a yes, Riaya loses it again. Seika adds that her friend swore never to betray anyone, so he can be trusted. Still lost in her trauma, Riaya feels the pain stab through her missing arm, while Shidru notes this crazy woman could probably use a spoon to skin Seika alive. Groaning about her wounds feeling hot, Riaya asks Seika to take her to where they fetch water. Seiji offers to help support her if she needs it. Since the stud volunteered, Riaya jokes she'll also need some help taking a bath. laughing when the boy gets all flustered, and teases him, calling him a pervert but innocent at the same time. Seika asks if he really is a pervert, and Shidru jumps in before Seiji gets cancelled by the two girls. He steps up carefully, but Riaya threatens to scream if he so much as touches her. Seika asks if the big guy is a pervert too, and the two men just lay down, thoroughly cancelled. Riaya laughs again after roasting the guys, until Ri shows up, still suspicious of this intruder. Taking it all in stride, Riaya again invites Seika to come with her to the water. And not only does Seika agree, she even hands Riaya a sword to protect herself from any threats in the woods. Shidru can't see any good reason to stop them now, so he lets the pair go. But Ri shoots him a look that says, "I got this." Worried, Shidru gets up to follow after them too, but Seiji stops him. He points out that the woman is dangerous, but Shidru already knew that. After all, Riaya is the kind of rose that'll prick your hand if you touch without care. Shidru tries to say that's not quite what he meant, but Seiji insists that Seika is 17 and knows how to take care of herself. With that, he asks if the monkey wants a banana. In other words, does Shidru want a bowl of porridge while they wait for the girls to come back, to get around the fact that he can't reveal what's going on, while also pretty much breaking the laws of space and time. Shidru darts so quickly between the campsite and the river where the girls are that his body seems to blur, vibrating so intensely it completely confuses his partner. After all, having a trillion points in agility comes with its perks, and the big guy knows exactly how to use them. Seiji rubs his eyes, starting to think maybe his porridge was spiked, but his friend assures him he's just tired. With that, Shidru activates his sleep-inducing skill, knocking Seiji out instantly. He realizes he should have done this from the start, but since there's no turning back time, the ugly brute tosses a blanket over the kid and heads off on his mission. Down by the river, Riaya was telling Seika that Seiji's a good-looking guy, just still kind of immature. Seika, on the other hand, thinks he's actually pretty strict, but always puts others before himself. Not just him, all three of his friends in the group are amazing, too. Hearing this, Riaya turns away and admits she'd love to join the team, but unfortunately, she can't. She's made it very clear in her special details that she would never forgive pretty girls. When Riaya draws her sword, Seika asks what she did wrong. Riaya answers, "Nothing at all. In fact, you've been nothing but kind to me, but a promise is a promise. It's written right there in my game window, so I can't break it." To be honest, just looking at pretty girls messes with her head, filling it with violent impulses. And before she knows it, she's already made a huge mistake every single time. Watching the scene closely, Shidru can see how much Riaya suffers, trapped by her own impulses, but braces himself for the worst if she loses control. Seika starts crying and asks why Riaya would put something so cruel in her special details. Riaya explains that beautiful girls have ruined everything she ever cared about, stealing her man and laughing in her face. Consumed by hatred, she ended up carrying that into her own character window, and that curse got her kicked out of town. Even in exile, Riaya kept chasing down groups to take out any girl who was above average in looks. But now, the criminal promises she's putting an end to this cycle, because after she finishes her job today, she's going to ask Seiji to kill her. With that, Riaya raises her sword for a killing blow, but Riz shoots an arrow to knock the weapon from her hands. Riz immediately tries to hit Riaya, but she's fast dodging the arrows with ease. Riaya makes a run for her sword, determined to finish what she started. But this time it's Shidru who shows up to grab her only remaining hand. She calls him a pig and tells him to let go. Shidru just jokes he's not falling for that pickup line, then draws his own sword, declaring this is the end of the line for the assassin. Just then, a blinding light fills the scene, dazzling everyone around. After a few suspenseful seconds, it turns out to be Seika, shining in an angelic form. Faced with the shock on everyone's faces, the angel pleads for an end to the suffering unfolding before her. Startled, Riaya still threatens to destroy the angelic figure, but the pain in her arm keeps her from looking even remotely imposing. Seika points out that the woman doesn't really want to commit such acts, and Riaya, somewhat reluctantly, agrees. But she insists that the things written in her game window are driving her so mad she can't help herself. Shidru can't help but pity the poor girl. All the more because there's no way to change what's been written in those special notes. Still, Seika holds on to hope that she might be able to change things. She doesn't know how yet, but she's willing to try, so she approaches Riaya to offer her help. Once again, Riaya resists, ordering the angel to stay back so Seika, tired of all this pain, simply regenerates the arm of the one who's supposed to be her enemy. Riaya looks down at her healed arm with tears in her eyes, while Shidru muses that, even as the absolute god, he's never managed anything like this. Then, Seika reveals she wrote something in the special notes. If her friends ever suffered deeply, she'd become an angel with the power to restore what was lost. Before coming to this world, the girl had a terrible wound on her face that cost her an eye, and the pain of lacking something she should have had was so great, she just wanted to find a way to make it stop. On the other hand, the angel doesn't believe she can heal internal wounds. But after restoring the woman's arm, perhaps Riaya herself can find a way to let go of the darkness in her heart. Still, despite the angel's comforting words, the human orders her away again and grabs her sword from the ground. Yet, seeing the way Seika cried, Riaya can't bring herself to see her as a target anymore, and she runs off. Instantly, Reese chases after her, while Seika returns to her human form and faints, only for Shidru to catch her before she hits the ground. Meanwhile, after distancing herself from the others, Riaya drags her sword against a tree, sketching something onto the bark. She then examines the blade with a strange look, until Shidru comes running and disarms her, wedging the weapon high up in the trunk. Riaya asks if he's come to finish her off, but he bristles at being mistaken for a criminal. In truth, he just came to check on her after Reese told him where she was. Actually, he asks, was she thinking of gouging out her own eye? Given the way she looked at the blade, she admits there's no other option. The big guy makes it clear he'd hate to see her hurt herself again, especially since Seika would be devastated too. Riaya says that's the wrong approach. He could simply eliminate her right now, but instead, he offers her a deal. What's on the table is a way to lose only her sight. Riaya finds it too good to be true until Shidru conjures a shadowy snake with his hand, saying it's the greatest power of darkness, the five-fingered hell seal, capable of sealing one of the five senses. In return, Riaya can live her life as she should. Suspicious, she asks who he really is. He claims he's just a merchant. Though he's currently out of business cards, Riaya mocks that he sounds like he's trying to sell her an overpriced copier, and Shidru realizes she's no fool. Anyway, he reminds her that Seika wants her suffering to end, and this magic is all he has to offer, a spell that will seal her vision without harming her eyes. According to the big guy, the ability will last until it's undone by a light-based power, and he assures her it's a technique he can trust. Then Riaya asks if he's only doing all this to protect Seika because she's pretty. So he admits he also made mistakes in the special details. At first, he was going to abandon his group because he couldn't trust them. But Seika always insisted on keeping him close, and now he feels he owes her. One way to repay that debt is by protecting her. Riaya notes that Shidru is being more than fair, not to mention he's handsome. Or, well, his voice is. She confesses, honestly, that she envies Seika and the group she's formed. Shidru notices the girl is smiling, genuinely this time, and invites her to join the team. Still, Riaya turns him down. Her hands, she says, are stained with too much blood, and all that's left is for her to find her own path. She asks him to seal her vision once and for all, and so, Shidru Yoshioka begins the enchantment. Some time later, Seika wakes up in the same part of the forest where she fainted. Beside her sits Shidru, her unofficial protector. The girl is surprised by the power she displayed earlier, but her friend thinks it's simply the manifestation of her wishes. Whatever its source, Seika wants to use it to help those in need. But Shidru suggests they keep it a secret after all. It's far too valuable, and if the wrong people find out, they could hurt her just to get it. See, there may be heroes in this world, but there are also villains always chasing after treasure. And while Seika is 17 and probably knows all this, Shidru still wants to stress it. Now that she has a power she must guard at any cost. Speaking of which, Seika has just been through quite the ordeal. And whether she always believes it or not, she really is beautiful, and the proof is that Riaya tried to kill her just because of that. In short, Seika isn't just a beautiful treasure, but a powerful one, and plenty of villains would love to steal that for themselves. With that in mind, the girl asks what she should do. He explains that he's not saying she shouldn't trust anyone, just that she should make an effort to understand the motives behind everyone's words since, as everyone knows, there are wolves in sheep's clothing. To that, Seika promises she'll do her best to unmask the wolves whenever she can. Now, if the girl finds herself in danger and can't save herself, no matter how hard she tries, Shidru asks her to call out his name as loud as she can, and he'll be there, ready to protect his companion. Pleased with his friend's attitude, Seika reaches out for a handshake. Not wanting to be rude, The big guy takes her hand, only to feel such a sharp pain that he can't even tell if her hand is hot or cold. All his focus goes into not crushing that tiny, delicate hand. As dawn breaks the next morning, Seiji asks about Riaya. Shidru explains that she left last night, but she'd written a note for Seika. "Thank you for healing the wound in my heart. When we meet again, you can count on my help." Seika cries when she reads the message, while Seiji wishes he'd gotten the chance to say goodbye. Either way, Shidru assures them that Riaya looked great when she left. She seemed genuinely excited to find her own path and start a new life. Seiji turns to Seika and asks what that really means, but she just says it's a secret between girls. Later, as they get back on the road toward their goal, Seika wonders aloud what the Principality of Valeria might be like. Seiji is just as eager to find out, though he warns her not to get her hopes too high. A little ways behind them, Shidru is thinking back to a conversation he had with Riz after Riaya left. During that talk, he'd promised that the outsider wouldn't attack Seika again. Riz had admitted she was surprised when their ally transformed into that shining form. Shidru didn't really get it, since the blonde could read other people's status windows. She confirmed that, but explained that Seika's special details didn't include any description of the transformation, unlike Seiji's, which, in her opinion, had a little too much detail for her taste. Shidru wonders what kind of embarrassing stuff the kid wrote in his window to get that disgusted reaction from her, and even admits he'd love to read the whole thing, much to Ri's horror. He argues that he needs to know his allies' weaknesses. After all, if Seiji's special details come with big perks, the downsides must be just as serious. So Riz promises to try and write out Seiji's special details, but asks Shidru to pray for her so she can get through even the worst parts. Seeing the innocence fading from her eyes, Shidru tells her there's no rush, she can do it whenever Seiji finally decides on their journey's objective. After all, Seiji had said he wanted to reach a more populated area to gather information and give the group more options. Remembering that, Shidru had thought it over and concluded that Seiji would become a king one day after all. Kaisho once mentioned that a friend of his went from mercenary to king. In this world, a reincarnated person can make it to the throne. To Shidru, both Seiji and Seika are truly pure. The girl has this innocent ignorance, while the boy's goodness still shines bright, even though he's seen the darkness of society up close. In Shidru's mind, in a kingdom ruled by someone like Seiji, people like Seika could live in peace. Riz asks why Shidru couldn't be king, but he explains that it's just not his thing. Plus, with his terrible luck losing almost all his money, he'd probably bankrupt the kingdom. Seiji, on the other hand, is always talking about how he wants to guide and take care of people, and he really does look after everyone and lets them be who they are. That's exactly why Shidru wants him to become king. Honored by his words, Riz bows and asks Shidru to look after her brother. The big guy promises that they'll all work together on that. Back in the present, Shidru remembers that this was how the two of them set their secret objective. First, he needs his companions to level up, which should be easy enough with his support. Speaking of Seiji, the group's leader excitedly announces that they'll soon see the city right after they get through the endless horde of vicious monsters blocking the way. In a flash, the team sprints toward the battle, everyone except Seiji, who claims his shoelace came undone and tells the others to go on ahead. Shidru knows the guy doesn't even have laces, but, as innocent as always, Seika just keeps running straight at the enemies, forcing Shidru and Riz to chase after her. Shidru summons a wall of wind to protect his friend and scolds her for charging in like a maniac. Then, the big guy glances back at Seiji and realizes he's trying to transform into Aldean, or at least it looks that way. Too bad, really, because he'd tear those expensive new clothes to shreds. Speaking of which, Seiji realizes that's exactly what would happen. So he calmly takes off his clothes and folds them neatly before focusing on his transformation again. Seeing how long this is going to take, Shidru figures he'll have to handle this mess himself, but always keeping in mind that he wants Seika to level up. The frontline trio quickly climbs up a tower for safety, and Shidru buffs his ward with a blessing from the absolute god, boosting her accuracy, attack, and hit rate. Thanks to that, she manages to knock down the goblins trying to scale the tower. While the big guy takes care of the stairs, to deal with the swarm, he conjures balls of mud that turn into soldiers to go toe-to-toe with the monsters. Meanwhile, Seiji is still pushing himself to the limit, trying to trigger his transformation a challenge, since he needs to lose his cool to make it happen. And he's not exactly quick to anger. Out of nowhere, Seiji snaps, shouting, "Who stepped on my foot?" Shidru never saw that happen, but either way, the Aldean symbol bursts to life on the hero's chest. His muscles swell, and wings sprout from his back. From From that moment on, Seiji is Aldean once more the unstoppable hero. As Aldean charged swiftly at the enemies, Shidru couldn't help but notice the guy was in great shape, he just didn't get the point of the wings. Shouldn't he be flying instead of running? Whatever the case, wings or no wings, Aldean vaulted to the top of the tower and called out, asking if everyone was okay. Seika, confused, wanted to know who this guy was. Aldean just shrugged it off, saying he was a traveler, a wandering hero. Aldean here to save his allies in their time of need. And he meant it. Without breaking a sweat, the hero tore through every opponent in his way. But Shidru wasn't so sure things would stay that easy. Suddenly, a massive golem loomed up in front of the angel. Brimming with confidence, Aldean struck the monster's leg with his red slash. But the hit barely did more than flicking an elephant. Fuming, Aldean finally proved his wings weren't just for show, soaring into the air with the sword of an unstoppable hero in hand. What happened next wasn't shown in any image, but Shidru told us that was how the entire horde was wiped out, and everyone lived happily ever after. After the battle, the group continued their journey as the sun set, with Seika telling the story of how an incredible hero named Aldean appeared out of nowhere, saved them, and vanished just as quickly. Seiji joked that he'd love to meet the guy one day, and, speaking of which, the mage asked where Seiji had been during the fight. He lied, claiming he'd passed out after taking a blow, but assured them he was fine. Seika said she wished she'd had a chance to thank Aldean for saving them. Seiji, blushing, replied that he was sure the hero understood how she felt. Still keeping up the act, Seiji asked Rize what the hero's name was, but she stayed quiet. Seika jumped in enthusiastically, saying his name was Aldean, the wandering hero, while Shidru wondered if he should really be putting a crown on this kid's head. In the next scene, Seika was losing over and over again at a casino machine. A few hours earlier, the group had arrived in the Principality of Valeria. One of the first things they noticed was that here they'd find things that didn't exist in Iria. For example, an employment security office set up to match citizens with available jobs or guarantee unemployment benefits. After that, they returned the pack animal they had rented. The shop owner thought Shidru was one of the animals, which, of course, deeply offended the big guy. Seiji calmly explained that this so-called beast was actually just a member of their group, and the merchant nearly jumped out of his skin, which only irritated the insulted human even more. Speaking of Shidru, Seika commented that one of the animals looked just like him, something Shidru himself admitted because of its grumpy face. On the other hand, the girl thought the creature was actually kind of cute. Shidru asked Rize if she really found that thing cute, and the girl explained it depended on a person's taste. In fact, Seika seemed to find pretty much every animal adorable, which made Shidru realize that girls were capable of seeing cuteness in just about anything. Even after that little episode, Seika was still marveling at plush toys in a street market stall. The more they walked through the city, the more comfortable she seemed to get. Shidru acknowledged that this world might look wonderful at first glance, but he knew the reality was much grayer than that. For one, monsters here didn't drop money, while humans still got tired and hungry, and all those needs cost money to satisfy. As an absolute god, Shidru felt it was his mission to guide Seika and Seiji from the shadows, and that easy relief could actually become an obstacle for them, a distraction. As for himself, the ugly one needed to find a way to make money while keeping his absurd power hidden from the public, because that might just be the key to his protege's survival in this world. That night, while talking with Seiji at the inn, Shidru learned that his ally had asked street vendors, shopkeepers, and even government officials about ways to earn money, and discovered that the methods here weren't so different from the world they came from. In other words, the path was to find a normal job. To be honest, Shidru found the idea of getting a regular job in a fantasy world pretty dull. Seiji pointed out that, in any case, it seemed that everyone who lived decently here was someone who'd landed a job paying around 2,000 riras, roughly 200,000 yen a month. Shidru wondered if they couldn't just make a living by wiping out hordes like the last one they'd taken down. Seiji thought they probably could, but only if they were working under someone not hunting monsters on their own. Shidru remembered that the employment office had listed plenty of low-paying jobs, but also some well-paid ones like detective's assistant, with a monthly salary of 10,000 riras. There was also a CO's secretary position paying 15,000, and even a garbage collector job offering 28,000 riras a month. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of garbage people dealt with here to get paid that much. Still, none of those jobs required prior experience. The problem was, these offers seemed a little too good to be true, and Shidru could easily picture Seika walking straight into that kind of trap without a second thought. According to Seiji, ordinary jobs paid just enough to get by, while shady ones paid far more, even to people with no experience. With that in mind, the group leader invited Shidru to the city's casino, figuring they'd meet all kinds of people there, exactly what they needed to get genuinely interesting offers and information straight from unusual, intriguing sources. Seiji had figured out that to succeed in life here, he needed to open the boldest paths possible, always chasing greater achievements and knowledge. But to do that, he also needed his trusty companion's help. That's how they ended up at the casino, and it's no coincidence that's where we find them in the next scene. As always, Seika was the most excited, the most frantic, and the unluckiest of the bunch, making sure to try every game possible and losing at every single one. Shidru wasn't exactly a lucky man himself, and he still drew the same contemptuous stares from people who couldn't handle his outrageous ugliness. With an appearance score of -255, he already knew gathering information would be hard, so his best bet was to rely on the handsome members of the team. Seiji, for example, seemed to be doing well with his determination and charm, while Rize worked in the shadows with her window reading skill, extremely useful in situations like this. Seika, on the other hand, didn't seem the least bit interested in working. She was only there to play. At least she took a break to eat something. That's when Shidru asked how much money she still had, since she'd started with 50,000 riras and seemed to have lost most of it. Seika replied she still had 30,000 plus a single 10 rira coin. That made the poor man lose a few more hairs from a head that was already past its prime. To make matters worse, a man named Kajita introduced himself to Seika as the manager of the casino hall. Without shame, he asked if she happened to be rich. She answered without hesitation that she was, with pride as big as her innocence. At that moment, Shidru regretted never teaching her not to go around telling people she had a lot of money. Naturally, Kajita, being the casino owner, had been eyeing her from the start. Noticing her carefree way of playing and assuming only a rich person could lose that much money with a smile on their face, the manager then invited her to a private conversation. Of course, she asked Shidru what he thought, and he decided to go with her. So the two of them were led into a staff-only room, where the young woman was served a cup of hot chocolate. Shidru noticed that the casino, as a whole, was already quite fancy, but this office felt even more so. Without a doubt, this business was extremely profitable. To start things off, Kajita praised the boldness the girl showed when gambling, the unique audacity of a true tycoon, going all in with her eyes closed and all that. Seika was delighted by the compliment, while Shidru knew perfectly well it was far from the truth. Still, the manager went on to announce that he offered a special service for such generous customers, something called the Extra Stage. This service promised thrilling games and exclusive rates, tailored for regular patrons who found no satisfaction in the usual, run-of-the-mill matches. Kajita believed this kind of benefit was perfect for a daring player like Seika, and she could have it all included in her play sessions for a mere 20,000 riras, complete with a limited time discount on the enrollment and annual fees. Innocent as always, Seika asked if there would be an annual fee the following year, but the manager, eager to have her as a client, promised never to charge it again. She wondered why he was so insistent on recruiting her, and he explained that the bets born from the delicate, refined hands of such a beautiful lady were incredibly invigorating, thanks to her charm and strength. Shidru, already wary of the man's silver tongue, became even more alert at how skillfully he wove his words. Luckily, Seika asked her friend for his opinion. Even though he knew this man was trying to swindle her, Shidru didn't want to confront him too soon. Instead, he suggested that she consult Seiji before making any decisions. Kajita didn't mind, assuming this friend must be as wealthy as the girl herself. She admitted he was, though not quite as much as her, and that only confirmed to Shidru that he still had a long road ahead in this mess. As they were about to leave, the manager stopped them to ask that they not share this offer with anyone, clearly hoping for a positive answer. When the door closed, Seika commented on what a great person. The manager was nearly giving Shidru a heart attack. That's when Rize arrived, just as Seika stepped out to call Seiji. After observing the man earlier, she told the big guy that Kajita had some rather disturbing, special details, which read, "I will never be deceived again. I will ruin the rich. I'll strip them of everything, leave them with nothing, and then push them straight into hell." Later, back at the inn, Seika learned about this and was shocked to hear that Kajita might be evil. Despite what was said, Seiji didn't outright claim he was. but at the very least, they needed to keep their guard up. Since they were already discussing suspicious behavior, Shidru pointed out that the man was a master at stirring desires and making you feel special, in other words, a very dangerous person. Seika asked how her friend knew all that. Since he couldn't reveal that Riz had the ability to read other people's windows, he joked that he'd been a detective in the past, a convenient way to dodge the question for now. Seiji then unintentionally helped steer the conversation away by showing them a stack of job listings. According to him, they all had something in common. They paid well, required no prior experience, and most importantly were all connected to the casino. Seiji had managed to interview people who had responded to these listings, but strangely, none of them had been hired. The only exception was someone whose friend had gotten a job as a detective's assistant. That person's name was Kai Yashio, and according to him, the job was simple. Find people spending large sums at the casino. Shidru asked if the man had earned the equivalent of 1 million yen in salary. But before answering, Seiji added an important detail: the friend in question had gone missing. Kai couldn't reach him, so he went to check in person, only to find that the man's house had turned into an empty lot for sale, and even the record of his family had vanished. Worse still, the city hall refused to process the missing person report as if the man had never existed. Considering all of this, combined with Kajita's disturbing special details, Shidru found it likely that the casino manager had gotten rid of the detective's assistant altogether. At that point, the big guy glanced at Riz, silently encouraging her to share whatever important thing she had been holding on to. Feeling confident, she stood up and handed Seiji something she had found behind the casino. The boy froze at the sight of what lay beneath the cloth, and when Seika grew curious, Shidru advised her not to look since it was, in fact, a human finger. Riz explained that she'd been investigating the back entrance when she saw a hooded man throw away a sack. She waited until he left before checking it. She had considered following him but decided against it. Seiji agreed with that choice. It could have been far too dangerous. In any case, this was proof that the casino was involved in some very shady business, and it would be wise to dig deeper into what was truly happening there. Since she'd been flattered and recruited by the manager, Seika volunteered to infiltrate the casino, even knowing that the main target was rich individuals. Her anger at him for hurting innocent people fueled her determination to do whatever it took. Aware of his friend's limited judgment, especially when she was fired up like this, Shidru hoped Seiji would forbid it, but instead, their leader supported the plan wholeheartedly, even showing more resolve than Seika to uncover the crimes behind the case. Later, in a private conversation with Riz, Shidru asked if she was upset with him for failing to keep Seika out of danger, but she was only angry at Kajita for everything he'd done. Speaking of him, Shidru remembered she had once said that perhaps not even an absolute god could match someone like that manager, so he wanted to know what kind of abilities the man possessed. Riz didn't know everything about him, but she did know this: he could detect any lie, and she suspected that this ability might serve as a trigger to activate other powers. Riz couldn't figure out everything about the enemy, because his window was unlike anything she'd ever seen, patched up, stitched together, utterly unusual. Shidru knew he had to be careful, but he couldn't ignore the fact that the manager's hatred toward the rich spoke volumes about him. After all, Riaya had been controlled by the special details she'd written out of hatred and had still managed to resist it. Yet this man didn't seem the least bit remorseful for the crimes he kept committing. Still, Shidru found it almost euphoric that all they'd been looking for was a job, only to stumble upon a multi-million crime network. Riz agreed it was incredible to see the four of them fighting together toward the same goal. That had been the heart of her prayers after she'd finished her confession. Shidru remarked that maybe it had been her confession that had brought the four of them together, but she explained there was no continuation to her prayers. If true evil ever revealed itself to her, Riz would become an envoy of hell and invite them all into the darkness, and with that said, it was time to meet the enemy. Soon, the group gathered to uncover the casino's secrets. At the entrance, Seika drew every eye with her beauty, elegance, and confidence, even though, just minutes earlier, she'd looked like a frightened child. Still, she'd done remarkably well after receiving a few quick lessons from Shidru on how to escape certain dangerous situations without lying. Since their enemy was an expert at detecting that, on top of that, Seika had learned never to reveal personal information to bad people, to avoid triggering any of Kajita's other abilities. Speaking of the devil, Kajita greeted Seika with his usual sweet words. She accepted the offer to become a VIP member on the condition that the manager had a game worthy of her. Thrilled by the challenge, the man invited her and Shidru for a private conversation. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.